Picture this. It is August of the year 2000. You are sitting in an office in Silicon Valley, and you're just staring at a spreadsheet.
And it's basically screaming at you.
Literally screaming.
Yeah.
Because your company is burning through $12 million. And we are not talking about a year. Not even a quarter. $12 million in a single month.
Which is just terrifying math.
Right. The expense curve isn't just going up, it's exponentiating. It is bending upward at this aggressive, terrifying angle. And the revenue line?
Let me guess.
Flat.
A flat zero. By absolutely every traditional metric of business survival, you are already dead. You just haven't hit the ground yet.
Yeah, I mean, that is the absolute definition of being default dead. Most rational human beings would look at that specific spreadsheet, pack up their desk, and just call a bankruptcy lawyer.
Hopefully.
But the people looking at that spreadsheet didn't do that. They restructured, they aggressively altered their tactical execution without, abandoning their core thesis, and they survived.
Because that company was PayPal. Exactly, PayPal.
Yeah.
And that ability to just stare into the abyss of a $12 million burn rate and not blink, I mean, that is exactly what we are dissecting today.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we are pulling our sources from a really detailed, long-form masterclass on startup creation.
It's a fascinating syllabus.
It really is. But we are setting aside the actual technical stuff, like the coding and the term sheets. We are zeroing in on one specific session today, Lecture 13. Which focuses entirely on the psychology, the structural forces, and the power dynamics of being what the source material calls a great founder.
Right. Which means we have to completely dismantle this pervasive, almost religious mythology surrounding tech founders.
Oh, the mythology is huge.
It's massive. The cultural imagination has built these towering statues of the Silicon Valley founder. So our mission today is to tear those statues right down to the studs. We want to rebuild a factual, psychological, and operational profile of what it actually takes to survive the fog of war and scale an organization.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mythology we're dealing with is incredibly thick. We look at these iconic figures, the Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos of the world, and the media just paints them with this impossible, frictionless brush.
Frictionless is the perfect word for it.
Yeah, and the source material uses a fantastic phrase for this illusion. It calls it a panopticon of skills.
The panopticon.
Right.
It's this pervasive idea that a great founder has this 360-degree omnipotent perfection about them.
Like they see everything.
Exactly. The narrative suggests that, to build a billion-dollar company, you must be simultaneously flawless at product design, brilliant at corporate strategy, a master manipulator of human psychology and management, and just an unparalleled wizard at fundraising.
Which is just not human.
No, it's not.
The sources actually mention a specific media quote that really captures the absolute absurdity of this worship. A major publication literally called Bill Gates smarter than Einstein.
Smarter than Einstein. I mean, come on. That is a comparison that fundamentally misunderstands both software engineering and theoretical physics.
Totally.
Even Bill Gates would likely find that deeply uncomfortable. It's a complete category error. But, it perfectly illustrates how desperately the public and, frankly, many investors and aspiring entrepreneurs want this founder as Superman narrative to be true.
You really do crave it.
We crave the idea of the singular genius who just bends the universe to their will through sheer, unadulterated intellect.
It is exactly like the comic book superhero archetype. We want these founders to be Superman, capable of leaping tall industries in a single bound. But what that narrative completely ignores is that even Superman had kryptonite.
Exactly.
And we look at the reality presented in the sources. No one, literally no one, is universally superpowered. These founders are mere mortals, and they're operating in a state of constant, crushing triage.
Yeah, and that triage happens in an environment of near total uncertainty. Which brings us to a really fascinating dynamic the lecture outlines. The genius versus madman tightrope.
Oh, I love this part.
It's so good. Let's analyze the epistemology of a startup for a second. You are trying to build something that does not currently exist for a market that might not even know it wants it.
Using technology that might still be totally experimental.
Right. So in that environment, a founder might genuinely possess genius-level insight about where the world is heading. But because the environment is so unpredictable and the idea is so novel, that founder will almost certainly be labeled a madman by the establishment.
Because to the establishment, acting on unproven data just looks like sheer irrationality.
Exactly.
If you're operating 5 years in the future, your actions today look completely disconnected from present reality. So everyone thinks you're crazy.
Precisely. Or, to look at the darker flip side of that coin, A founder might actually be a madman making completely irrational, chaotic choices.
Just throwing darts at a board?
Right. But they happen to get incredibly lucky. Macroeconomic shifts move in their favor, the market absorbs their chaos, and retrospectively, society slaps the genius label on them.
Survivorship bias basically writes the history books.
It really does. So the crucial takeaway from the source isn't that you need to be an omniscient genius. The real superpower is the psychological fortitude to manage that chaos when everyone thinks you have lost your mind.
Which forces a very practical question for you, the listener. If we accept that the super founder who can do everything perfectly is a total myth, and these people are mortal humans with massive blind spots, how do these companies survive the early days?
It's a great question.
How does a startup not just collapse under the weight of the founder's inevitable kryptonite?
2 words. Structural compensation.
Okay, break that down.
Because you do not possess a panopticon of skills individually, you have to build one collectively. And this is exactly where the power dynamics of the founding team come into play. The lecture is very clear on the structural math here. It argues that the ideal number of founders is 2 or 3.
Now, I know solo founders exist. I mean, there are massive companies built by a single person at the helm from day one. But the sources suggest that the die is walking a much more dangerous tightrope.
It's simply a question of risk mitigation. A solo founder can work, just like free climbing a mountain without a rope can work.
But it's terrifying.
But it's terrifying, and having a team is structurally safer. When you have 2 or 3 founders, you can actively, aggressively compensate for each other's weaknesses.
Right.
Like if you are a visionary product designer who is terrified of public speaking and terrible at spreadsheets, you need a co-founder who eats financial models for breakfast.
Someone who loves pitching venture capitalists.
Exactly. You are distributing the immense operational load, but more importantly, you are distributing the psychological load.
But, introducing another human being or two into a high-pressure, mortal stakes environment that introduces its own massive vector for failure. The sources dedicate a significant amount of time to the existential threat of what they call the messy divorce.
Yeah, because it is one of the most common causes of death for early-stage startups. Picture the reality here. You are 12 months down the road. You've built the V1 of the product. The initial seed capital is drying up. Your server costs are spiking.
You're sleeping under your desk.
You're sleeping under your desk, eating ramen. The stress is unimaginably toxic. And suddenly, you and your co-founder realize you have a fundamental, unresolvable disagreement about the vision of the company.
It's not just a disagreement at that point. It's a fracture.
It's a complete fracture. And if the founding relationship fractures at that stage, the company usually just dies right there. The lawyers get involved, the cap table gets paralyzed, the investors pull back, and all momentum halts.
So, if the messy divorce is fatal, how do you prevent it? I mean, the naive assumption is that you just picked your best friend, someone you have perfect harmony with, someone who always agrees with you.
What's fascinating here is that the source material violently rejects that idea.
Really?
Yeah. A great founding partnership is not about perfect harmony. It is not about everyone sitting in a conference room singing from the same sheet and validating each other's egos. It is fundamentally about collaborative problem solving through friction.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. There is a brilliant anecdote in the sources about the early days of PayPal that illustrates this friction perfectly. It involves Max Levchin, who was the technical genius behind PayPal's incredibly complex fraud detection systems, and Peter Thiel, the CEO.
It perfectly captures the optimal power dynamic between co-founders. The source notes that Max Levchin would not walk into Peter Thiel's office to stroke his ego.
No.
He wouldn't walk in to agree with whatever strategic pivot Thiel had just dreamed up. Levchin would walk into that office with the express purpose of pointing out exactly what was about to kill the company.
Good morning, Peter. Here are the 3 structural flaws in our fraud model that will bankrupt us by Friday.
Exactly. And Thiel, to his credit, understood the value of that. That is what you are looking for in a co-founder. You are looking for a peer who has the intellectual authority and the psychological safety to help you navigate the field of battle.
To arrive at the objective truth.
Yes. Even if that truth is horrifying, it is not about blind cheerleader support. It is about holding each other ruthlessly accountable to the reality of the data.
Okay, so you've survived the psychological warfare of picking a co-founder. You have this tightly knit, aggressively honest team. But a perfect team in a vacuum still dies if they don't have access to the right resources.
Which dictates a geographic decision.
Exactly. The sources move from the internal dynamics of the team to the external structural forces of location. Where does this team physically place themselves on a map?
Which is perhaps one of the most misunderstood aspects of startup culture. There is this pervasive mainstream narrative that founders move to specific tech hubs like Silicon Valley or New York or London for the lifestyle.
Right, like it's about the weather or the prestige or going to the right artisan coffee shops.
Exactly. And the source material is remarkably blunt about this. It explicitly states that great founders seek out specific geographical hubs for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with lifestyle.
Nothing at all.
They move to access hyper-specific networks that are essential to solving their exact structural problems.
To understand why location is life or death, we have to revisit the baseline state of a startup. The lecture uses a deeply visceral metaphor for entrepreneurship. It says it's like jumping off a cliff and assembling an airplane on the way down.
It's a terrifying image, but it perfectly encapsulates the momentum of a startup. You are falling.
You are falling, and the ground is rapidly approaching. Because, as we discussed with PayPal, the default state of a newly born startup is default dead.
Right.
If you do nothing, if you fail to figure out the aerodynamics, the engine, and the steering before you hit the ground, the company ceases to exist. Therefore, as a founder, you are obligated by the laws of survival to take every single possible advantage you can find.
You have to cheat gravity however you can.
And one of those massive gravity-defying advantages is the physical network you immerse yourself in. The sources analyze Silicon Valley as a specific type of optimized network. It's not a magic geography.
No, not at all.
It's a highly tuned machine, optimized for very specific things: software, mobile applications, network effects, and a philosophy of capital efficiency.
Let's define the limits of that capital efficiency because it's crucial. In Silicon Valley, the investors, the talent pool, the legal infrastructure, they all implicitly understand how to scale software rapidly.
They speak the same language.
They do. They know how to take a small amount of capital and use it to acquire users globally without building massive physical infrastructure. If you are building a SaaS product, everyone around you speaks that exact language.
But the lecture provides a phenomenal counterexample to prove that Silicon Valley is not the universal answer to every startup equation.
Yeah.
They bring up the origin of Groupon.
Oh, yeah. Groupon is a great case study. If we look at the early days of Groupon, their business model was incredibly human capital intensive. To scale, they required renting a massive 25-story building and filling 20 of those floors with hundreds and hundreds of salespeople.
Just relentlessly cold calling local businesses to secure daily deals.
Exactly.
Imagine taking that business plan. Hi, I need funding to rent a skyscraper and hire 1,000 entry-level sales reps to use telephones and pitching it to a Sand Hill Road venture capitalist in Silicon Valley.
You wouldn't just be rejected, you would be laughed at and heavily criticized. The source notes that this kind of intensely operational, low-margin, human-heavy plan runs entirely counter to the ethos of Silicon Valley capital efficiency.
You'd never get it off the ground.
In California, you would fail to attract top engineering talent. They want to solve complex technical problems, not support a massive sales floor. And you would fail to attract capital. But Groupon started in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago.
And in Chicago, that kind of robust, blue-collar, sales-driven business model was deeply understood by the local talent pool and the local investors. It worked perfectly because the local network supported the specific structural needs of the company.
They give another example about the fashion industry. If you want to start a high-end fashion brand, moving to Silicon Valley is a fundamentally terrible idea. Not because your clothing is bad, but because the supporting network, the textile manufacturers, the pattern makers, the specialized fashion buyers, the media ecosystem, it simply does not exist there. You would be trying to assemble an airplane without any of the right parts available.
Exactly.
But, let me push back on this geographical determinism for a second, because the lecture we are sourcing was given a few years ago, and we now live in an era of ubiquitous broadband, Zoom, Slack, and asynchronous collaboration.
Sure.
This entire concept of moving to a hub aggressively challenges the modern ideal of remote work and the digital nomad founder. If code can be deployed to AWS from a beach in Bali, and I can video chat with my investors, why do founders still need to throw themselves off a literal physical cliff in a specific ultra-expensive zip code?
It is the most common pushback today, and it's a vital question. What the sources are highlighting and what holds true even in a post-Zoom world is the concept of network aggregation.
Network aggregation.
Yes, we have to separate the act of building from the act of surviving. Yes, you can write code anywhere. You can wire money anywhere. But a startup hub provides proximity to the right kind of resources at the exact moment you need them.
It's the ambient knowledge.
Exactly. It's about being surrounded by a talent pool that implicitly understands your specific business model without you having to explain the fundamentals. It's about being in an environment where certain business practices are the accepted, unspoken language.
So it's not just about messaging someone on Slack.
No. When you are assembling that airplane in midair, you don't just need people to hand you tools via a Slack channel. You need people standing next to you who anticipate which wrench you need before you even ask, because they've built this exact type of engine before.
Right.
Proximity accelerates serendipity. You overhear conversations in coffee shops. You meet a specialized lawyer at a dinner party who solves a regulatory hurdle in 5 minutes that would have taken you 3 months to research from Bali. Remote connection is highly efficient for execution, but physical network aggregation is unparalleled for rapid problem solving when you are in that hyper-vulnerable default dead stage.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
You are systematically mitigating risk by immersing yourself in the specific knowledge pool you need.
Oh.
Okay, so you have the team. You have the location. Now let's look at the actual ideas these founders are bringing into these hubs. The business world throws around the word contrarian constantly.
It's almost a cliche at this point.
It really is. You have to be a contrarian founder.
Yeah.
But the sources dedicate a massive section to deconstructing the actual psychology of holding a contrarian idea. And it is vastly more complex and painful than just having a quirky opinion.
The term has been completely diluted by pop business culture. People equate being contrarian with simply being argumentative or different for the sake of being different.
Just being an edgelord, basically.
Yeah. But the lecture establishes a hard, unforgiving rule. A contrarian idea is only valid and only possesses economic value if you are actually right. Being a contrarian who is wrong is just a fast track to bankruptcy and isolation.
To separate the tree contrarians from the people just being edgy, the source provides a fantastic, highly practical litmus test. If you have an idea for a company and you cannot find a smart, highly expert person who thinks your idea has serious, fundamental structural challenges, your idea is not contrarian.
By definition. Because if every intelligent person in your industry agrees with your thesis, then it is an obvious idea. And if it is an obvious idea, it is highly likely that an incumbent corporation with infinitely more capital, a massive existing user base, and an army of engineers is already building it.
You have zero advantage.
None.
To illustrate what a true contrarian thesis looks like in practice, the sources dive deep into the founding of LinkedIn by Reid Hoffman.
This is a masterclass in navigating expert rejection. When Hoffman was conceptualizing LinkedIn in the early 2000s, he didn't hide the idea. He actively went around and pitched the concept of a professional social network to the smartest, most experienced people in his Silicon Valley network.
He actively wanted their feedback.
He sought it out. And the result, 2/3 of them thought he was absolutely nuts.
And here is the crucial part. They didn't think he was nuts because they were stupid or lacking vision. They thought he was nuts based on a very intelligent, highly expert critique of how network products operate.
Their argument was mathematically sound. They understood the fundamental laws of network effects. They told Hoffman, look, a network product has zero intrinsic value for the first person who joins. You log on and you are alone.
It is just a blank screen.
Right. It has zero value for the 10th person. To reach critical mass, to actually be useful as a professional networking tool, you need 500,000 to 1 million active users already on the platform.
Which is huge.
So their intelligent, logical conclusion was that LinkedIn faced an insurmountable cold start problem. They believed it was impossible to jumpstart a massive network from zero without burning billions of dollars in marketing.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because Hoffman wasn't just blindly ignoring these very smart people. He wasn't sticking his fingers in his ears and going, la, la, la. He actually agreed with their math. But he knew something they didn't. He possessed what the source calls information asymmetry.
This is the core of the contrarian advantage. What was Hoffman's asymmetry?
He understood a subtle psychological reality about professionals at that time. He knew that people desperately wanted an online, up-to-date Rolodex to keep track of their contacts, but they hated the awkward, transactional social pressure of actively networking or passing out business cards.
Right, nobody likes that.
So Hoffman realized he didn't need to sell them a network on day one. He could build a product that provided massive value to the individual user purely as a static single-player address book.
He solved the multiplayer cold start problem by building a single-player utility.
Yes.
He gave people a tool to organize their own lives. And as thousands of individuals selfishly uploaded their contacts to use this personal utility, they inadvertently built the database that triggered the massive multiplayer network effect.
Which is brilliant.
By the time the experts realized what had happened, the network was already locked in. That is the decisive edge of a true contrarian.
It makes me think of an analogy. Being a true contrarian isn't about being the only person wearing a heavy, insulated winter parka in the middle of a scorching July heat wave just to be different and get attention.
That's just being foolish.
Right. Everyone really thinks you're crazy. Being a true contrarian is wearing that winter parka in July because you are the only person holding a highly calibrated barometer that proves a freak, localized blizzard is going to hit in exactly 5 minutes.
Wow.
You look absolutely insane to everyone around you right up until the snow starts falling.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And if we sit with that analogy for a moment, we have to consider the immense psychological burden of being that person in the parka.
It must be exhausting.
Imagine being Reid Hoffman in those early days. You are listening to highly intelligent, reasoned, mathematically sound disagreement from peers you deeply respect. They're looking you in the eye and telling you logically why you will fail and waste years of your life.
Sure, that hurts.
To survive that, you must possess the psychological fortitude to absorb their critique, respect their intellect, internalize the risks they are pointing out, yet maintain the absolute unwavering conviction that you possess a specific hack or insight that the entire market is blind to. It is an incredibly lonely, paranoid place to live.
Which perfectly transitions us into the most fascinating segment of the lecture. The psychological toll of holding that contrarian view brings us to what the sources argue is the actual core skill set of a great founder. And frankly, it has nothing to do with hard skills.
No, it doesn't.
The core skill set is not coding in Python. It is not growth hacking. It is the ability to navigate paradoxes.
Yes. The defining trait of a great founder, according to the source material, is the capacity to balance extreme, intensely opposing psychological and operational states without your brain breaking in half.
The lecture outlines 5 specific paradoxes. And they don't just briefly mention them. They frame the entire existence of a founder around them. Let's really dig into the mechanics of these. The first paradox is doing versus delegating.
Okay, so in traditional management theory, you get very clean advice. You are told to either roll up your sleeves and lead from the front, or you're told to hire brilliant people and get out of their way.
Right, pick a lane.
But the reality for a startup founder is that both of those pieces of advice are simultaneously true and false depending on the hour of the day. A founder must oscillate wildly between these two extremes.
Imagine the whiplash. At 9 a.m., a founder might need to swing to 100% granular execution. They might be micromanaging the specific hex color of a checkout button because that single button is currently dropping conversion rates by 2%, which will compound to kill the company in 6 months.
They are totally in the weeds.
Exactly. And then, at 11 a.m., that same founder must step into a board meeting and swing to 100% macro delegation. They must trust their VP of engineering completely to manage a team of 50 developers, entirely removing themselves from the code base so they can focus entirely on raising a $50 million Series B.
If they try to micromanage the engineering team, the company stalls.
Right.
But if they delegate the checkout button to a junior designer who doesn't understand the existential conversion metrics, the company bleeds out. It is not a 50-50 balance. It is having the judgment to know which 100% mode the company requires at any given second.
That requires shedding your ego constantly. You have to be willing to be the janitor and the visionary in the same afternoon.
Exactly.
The second paradox is perhaps the most difficult emotionally. Persistence versus flexibility. And the source frames this tension around a concept called the investment thesis.
So an investment thesis is the foundational argument for why your startup exists. It is the articulation of your contrarian idea why this market is broken, how your product fixes it, and what specific asymmetry you possess that incumbents do not.
It's your anchor.
That thesis is the source of your persistence. You must hold that core belief tightly, defending it against the skepticism we discussed earlier.
But blind persistence is just stubbornness, and stubbornness gets you killed.
Exactly. And that is where the opposing force comes in, flexibility. Your flexibility is dictated by how you react to empirical data. A great founder is in a state of constant paranoid inquiry, asking themselves every day, is the new data coming from the market, from our users, from our bank account, increasing or decreasing my confidence in my core thesis?
And this brings us back to that terrifying scenario we opened the deep dive with. The sources use the early days of PayPal to perfectly illustrate this tension between the thesis and the data.
Let's look at the math of that August 2000 moment again. PayPal's core investment thesis was persistent. Digital payments are the future of commerce, and we can build the network to facilitate them. That was the vision.
But the incoming empirical data was violently decreasing confidence in their ability to survive long enough to see that future. They were burning $12 million every 30 days.
Because at that time, they were essentially paying users to sign up to fuel the network effect. It was a massive customer acquisition cost.
Yeah, the expense curve was exponentiating because the more successful they were at acquiring users, the faster they bled cash. And with zero revenue, the math was apocalyptic.
Yeah.
So how did they handle the paradox?
Well, if they were purely persistent, they would have ignored the burn rate, kept giving away money, and crashed the company into the mountain.
Right.
If they were purely flexible, they would have abandoned the digital payment thesis entirely and pivoted to something safe, like building enterprise software for banks.
But they did neither. They held the core thesis digital payments, but they showed immense, radical flexibility in their tactical execution. They instituted an immediate, severe action plan to monetize the user base they had acquired, introducing fees and restructuring the product to stop the bleeding. They adapted to the terrifying data without losing the plot.
Which leads directly into the third paradox, belief versus fear.
Oh, this one is intense.
It is. You have to cultivate this almost arrogant, stubborn, visionary belief in how the world should be. You have to believe you can bend reality. But simultaneously, you must cultivate an intense, paranoid fear.
You have to actively welcome negative feedback, seek out the fatal flaws in your product, and watch your competitors with obsessive vigilance.
It's like driving a race car at 200 miles an hour. You have to believe deeply in your ability to handle the car, but you must be absolutely terrified of every microscopic bump in the track.
The fourth paradox ties into this: internal versus external focus.
Right, so a founder must lock themselves in a room and focus intensely on the internal mechanics of the company, building the culture, refining the product, managing the engineers.
But if they stay in that room too long, they lose touch with reality.
Exactly. So they must simultaneously maintain a massive external focus, gathering network intelligence, understanding macroeconomic shifts, meeting with investors, and talking to users.
Okay, I want to pause here and really think about the sheer, unadulterated exhaustion of living like this.
It's a lot.
How does a human brain constantly oscillate between 100% stubborn, visionary belief and 100% paranoid, data-driven fear? How do you bounce between micromanaging a pixel and pitching a 10-year vision, all while burning millions of dollars without completely snapping? It sounds like a literal recipe for a psychological breakdown.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains exactly why the burnout rate among founders is so astronomically high.
Yeah.
It is an unnatural way to live. The ones who survive, the ones who don't snap, possess what the source material calls the infinite learning curve.
The infinite learning curve. Tell me more about that.
Great founders do not rely on a static, unchanging set of skills they learned in an MBA program. Their primary foundational skill, the thing that keeps them sane, is the ability to continuously learn, to rapidly adapt, and most crucially, to entirely discard their own ego when the data demands a change in their mental framework.
So they have to be completely malleable.
Yes. If you are rigid, these paradoxes will rip you apart. If your ego prevents you from admitting that the data looks bad, you crash the airplane. The learning curve must be infinite because the problems are constantly mutating.
So adapting to the data and shedding the ego is how they survive the fall. Which brings us to the final major theme of the lecture, and it's one that requires redefining everything we think we know about risk, strategy, and this incredibly elusive modern concept of balance.
Oh yeah, the balance conversation.
Because the public perception, fueled by movies and magazine covers, is that founders are these wild cowboy risk takers who love taking massive gambles.
That is perhaps the most dangerous mischaracterization of all. Great founders are not gamblers. They are obsessively, neurotically focused on minimizing risk.
Really, minimizing it.
Yes. When they formulate their investment thesis, they do not bet the entire company on a single, massive, unproven launch. They look for the absolute smartest, cheapest, and easiest way to empirically test their riskiest assumption.
Right, they don't go out and build a $100 million massive server farm on day one just in case they get 1 billion users.
No.
They figure out how to get the first 1,000 users manually. They do things that don't scale just to see if the network effect actually takes hold. They isolate the single variable that will kill them fastest, and they test it with the least amount of capital possible.
Precisely. They are risk mitigators. And this framework of risk mitigation leads into how they view corporate strategy. The source dismantles the typical product-obsessed view of a startup and introduces a hierarchy called the strategy stack.
This was a light bulb moment for me. Because most people, especially technical founders, think the product is the center of the universe. The old adage, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door.
The mousetrap theory.
But the strategy stack completely flips that logic upside down.
It ruthlessly invalidates the mousetrap theory. In the strategy stack, product distribution is actually more fundamental and vastly more important than the product itself.
Let's really drill down into the WHY of that. Why does distribution trump the product? Because to an engineer, that feels completely backward and deeply unfair.
It feels unfair, but it is the cold math of business. Let's say you engineer a flawless, life-changing software product. The code is beautiful, the UI is intuitive, it solves a massive problem.
The perfect product.
But if you do not have a systematic, scalable mechanism to acquire customers, if your customer acquisition cost is higher than the lifetime value of that customer, the company bleeds cash and dies. The best product hidden in a basement, or buried on page 10 of an app store with no marketing engine, is economically worthless. So true.
Distribution is the vascular system of a company. If the blood doesn't reach the organs, the quality of the organs doesn't matter.
And what's below distribution in the stack? What is the absolute bedrock?
Financing.
Of course.
Because if you run out of money, the game ends entirely. You don't get a chance to fix your distribution, and you certainly don't get a chance to refine your product. You are dead.
So the hierarchy is brutally clear. Financing keeps the lights on, distribution dictates whether the market ever sees you, and the product is just the final artifact you deliver once the first two are solved.
Exactly. And understanding this strategy stack completely changes how great founders view the act of fundraising.
How so?
Well, the public sees a tech blog article announcing Startup X raises $50 million. And they view it as an isolated victory, a finish line, like they won the money.
Time to celebrate. But to a great founder, fundraising is never an isolated event. It is deeply, inextricably tied to the strategy stack. They raise money specifically to execute a distribution strategy that will hit the exact metrics required to set up the next round of financing. They're always playing 3 moves ahead on the chessboard, ensuring the oxygen never runs out.
Which requires an unbelievable, almost pathological level of focus. And this brings us to the most controversial and frankly the most jarring point in the sources, the myth of balance.
Yeah, this part is tough for a lot of people to hear.
We live in an era where we hear constantly about work-life balance, about preventing burnout, about self-care. But the source explicitly states that great founders have absolutely zero balance.
Zero. In fact, the lecture actively mocks the concept within the context of startup creation. They talk about economic development boards in various cities trying to attract tech entrepreneurs by promising a balanced lifestyle, great hiking trails, and a vibrant arts scene.
And the founder's response is, if I am trying to build a billion-dollar company and survive a $12 million burn rate, I'm not worried about my weekend hiking schedule.
Exactly. The source states without apology that founders are completely, intensely, and unapologetically unbalanced individuals. They are pouring every ounce of their physical, mental, emotional, and relational energy into the singular pursuit of winning.
They sacrifice everything.
They sacrifice hobbies, they sacrifice sleep, they sacrifice relationships, pouring everything into the company, even if it is only for a few incredibly intense years.
I have to point out to you, the listener, this directly, violently contradicts almost all modern corporate wellness and mental health advice we hear today.
Yeah.
To a normal person listening to this, it sounds deeply toxic and wildly unhealthy.
And in the context of a normal, stable career, it absolutely is unhealthy. But we must contextualize this within the metaphor of the clash. Startup survival is a quasi-mortal event. The entity you have birthed either lives or it dies in spectacular fashion.
It's life or death.
You cannot fight a desperate, hand-to-hand battle for your very survival on a balanced, predictable 9-to-5 schedule. You are falling toward the ground.
And the ground does not respect your work-life balance. Gravity doesn't care if it's the weekend.
Precisely. And the source highlights a fascinating twist on this. Venture capitalists and elite investors actually actively screen for this lack of balance.
Wait, really? They want you to be unbalanced?
Yes. During due diligence, they aren't just looking at the financials. They are looking for what they call intensity of insight. They view this obsessive, unbalanced, almost maniacal dedication as a deeply positive signal.
That's wild.
Why? Because the empirical data of venture capital shows that this specific, hyper-focused psychological state is the only one that correlates with surviving the incredibly high mortality rate of early-stage startups. They are funding the obsession.
Okay, we have covered a massive, complex landscape of psychology and strategy today. Let's synthesize this for you.
Yeah.
What we've learned from dissecting this lecture is that being a great founder isn't about being born an omnipotent superhuman genius with a flawless panopticon of skills.
Not at all.
The reality is much grittier, much harder, and much more human. It is about having the radical self-awareness to admit your own kryptonite and build a complementary high-friction team to cover your weaknesses.
Yeah, that friction is key.
It's about having the ruthless pragmatism to place yourself in the exact right physical network. Understanding that proximity is survival. It's about the psychological courage to hunt for contrarian truths and endure the brutal criticism of experts while you wait for the snow to fall.
The winter toad analogy.
Right. It's about riding an infinite ego-crushing learning curve, oscillating wildly through opposing paradoxes every single day. And ultimately, it's about sacrificing all personal balance, becoming a risk-mitigating obsessive to assemble that airplane before you hit the ground.
It is a profound, almost unimaginable psychological burden, which leaves us with a final, lingering, and slightly uncomfortable question to consider.
Go for it.
Over the last decade, we have built an entire global business culture that idolizes the startup mindset. We try to implement it everywhere. We tell middle managers at legacy insurance companies to act like founders. We praise hustle culture and move fast and break things in completely stable environments.
You do. It's everywhere.
But if the actual proven psychology of a great founder requires a total absence of balance, intense paranoia, navigating crippling paradoxes, and operating in a constant, terrifying state of default dead, is the founder mindset actually something the rest of the corporate world should be trying to emulate? Or is it a highly specific, deeply extreme psychological state that is only functional and only necessary if you have genuinely jumped off a cliff?
That is a brilliant tension to end on. Take that thought into your next project, your next corporate strategy meeting, or your next brainstorm. When someone tells you to think like a startup, remember the exact psychological price tag that actually entails. Thank you for joining us today for this deep dive. We are always here to aggressively unpack the world's most fascinating sources. Keep questioning the mythology, and we will see you next time.